or we would be mining assets that we already had, which would lead to you people feeling like we had, or some I should say, like we were rehashing content and really just not creating anything new. And so it was really hard for us, based on our production schedules, to create these DLCs and add and have the kind of scope that we wanted to, because we felt they had to have a beginning, middle, and end, all self-contained. And the trilogy format lets us do a lot of things. Most notably on the production side of things, we get to actually look farther ahead at what we're going to do. So from a storytelling standpoint, it's great because each trilogy can follow more of a 3-act traditional story structure, where you can have that kind of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. You can lead up to things a lot better because, as you guys know, you don't play our content necessarily in order. There is no first mission, middle mission, and last mission that you do. It can just kind of be played any way you want to play it. And so it's very hard for the designers to come up with a narrative that makes a lot of sense in that fashion. But at least now we can do it over a 3 DLC structure, where there are very significant beats and there's definitely a climax, because an entire DLC becomes the climax for a storyline when we reach part 3. So for all those reasons, we really like how this is working. Lets us tell the bigger stories, the 3-act structure. And so with War of the Light, let's use that as an example, because the part 2 is coming up right now, right? So we added a lot of stuff to that. We reused Metropolis and reskinned that area to have this War of the Light. And our plans are to open up more areas of the open world as the 3 parts progress, so that you have this very distinct and War of the Light themed metro that has nothing to do with the launch metro that you saw. And on top of that, we added Mogo and ranks, and it was very important just to have them in the sky so that you would go to them and feel like you were seeing this place that you would then go to, okay? But if you really think about it, those environments that we added right there, Mogo and ranks, were very focused in scope. And we had a lot of opportunity to then focus on characters that we were introducing. Brother Worth, Saint Walker, okay? Added Bleeze into the mix as well. And then we used this idea of the misted iconics, which then allowed us to take familiar characters to you guys that we already had and put, it paid off on something in the comics. Everybody read like Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night, Brightest Day and all that, right? So you're familiar with these characters getting kind of a ring. We did it differently, it's an homage to it, but we were able to pay off on the comics in a way that was really friendly for us on a production standpoint and still give this great story for you guys to see some cool moments leaping out of the pages onto the screen.
Yeah, I think that's some feedback we got from you guys, that you really like it when we take something from the comics and put a little DCUO twist on it.
Yeah. So this is a very successful format for us so far. War of the Light Part 2, as we said, it's introducing Carol Ferris and the Star Sapphires. It's getting Larfleeze, who's kind of relegated to the seasonal holiday content and Season's Greetings, into the mix as well. And so more misted iconics coming in from the Violet Mist and the Citrine Mist. And we have more locations, and we only had to add 3. We are going back to Mogo. We see Mogo in part 2, and ranks as well. But you also then get to go to the power batteries in Cord and Oa and Zamron. And part 3 is going to add a few more environments, and we'll probably use portions of the environments that we had from part 1 and part 2, because quite frankly, that's exactly what would happen in the books. These places, they don't just reinvent new places every single time they tell a Green Lantern story. No, they go to Oa and they check out the Guardians of the Universe up in their Citadel. These are places that you visit often, and trilogies let us do that, and it just feels more authentic to me as far as a comic book experience goes.
I have one comment too, that knowing that we have this trilogy coming, we can also plan things in advance. Some of the interesting things that Ian just said was about the open world battle zone Metropolis. We actually planned out where we might have the next colors coming from. So if you notice, when you're in Battle Zone Metropolis, there's actually a citrine mist around Lexport Tower. And if you saw into this keynote, there's a little clue in there about who's showing up in the citrine misted iconic.
Would you call an actual picture of Orange Lantern Luther a clue? Or a punch in the face?
And I don't know if anybody caught that, but in downtime, Hal asked Mogo if he happened to see any amethyst mist stuff around.
Yeah, there's a collection out there for that too.
All the stuff with the mist is going to just you're gonna really be like, oh my god, that's what everything that was going on in part 1 makes complete sense as to what's going on in part 2, and then when we go to part 3, not telling you about that. Let's move on before I do.
One last thing I want to add about it is it also allowed us to even do the new gods, because it's such a pantheon. There's no way we could have introduced all those characters in one DLC. So doing it in 3 parts and adding more each time, it actually lets us do a whole new storyline.
That's a very good point. The first 2 DLCs have a lot of existing assets for us to draw upon. Right? And so why are there parademons and bugs and dregs? Well, because we can reuse those a lot and then augment them with the 4 new gods that we have. You can probably look for, or I'll just say it right now, I mean, our scope is about 4 new gods per part. So by the end, we'll have 12, one of which we'll be shooting omega beams from his head. But, but where we go from there in future new gods DLCs, we can add to that cast to take advantage of it.
So now we're going to talk about the process from high level. How do we start telling a story, and when are we done telling a story? And there's about pretty much 4 stages of development. As you can see, there's the initial conception of the idea, the creative direction that's then communicated out to the rest of the leads and directors. And then there's a stage of feedback and planning where we particularly ask a few other people, we sit down and we talk about why or what, or we all have brainstorming sessions, and then design and art, engineering really, that's probably the biggest portion of it is the building, the implementation of it. And then in the end we go back and polish, which is stuff like cutscenes and final VO and stuff like that. And so an example of like the creative direction step would be like, Jens would be like, so in Amazon Fury Part 2, guess who's coming back? Brainiac! And we kind of go, what? And then we sit down and talk about it, and we flesh out the story idea of what we're doing. And we're like, oh, I get it. That's in step 2. And then we're not going to go past that. But anyway, so first Jens is going to talk to us about the first step in the process.
Yeah, so as far as creative direction goes, for me and the team, it is a macro view. I spent a lot of time while the current DLC is being worked on thinking about what the next DLC is going to be, and often even the one after that. When the trilogy structure first kicked off, I actually had to think about all 3 trilogies as a whole and get the general beats and the acts, and honestly I did them on 1 page, and each part had about maybe a 4 or 5 sentence paragraph to it that outlined the major beats that were going to happen and how they were kind of inspired by the comics, or maybe even more original kind of ideas that we had, but used the characters from the comics, which have pretty standard motivations in the books, so you can imagine they drive similar stories. And so I come up with this high-level idea or inspiration. War of the Light literally came about because of stories you saw in the comics, and I really love Ed Bennis's art. And this image always stuck with me when I would think about all of the cores that have been introduced, and how exciting it is for that mythos to have them all in there. We wanted to get them all showing up on the screen. So I'll come up with that theme and that concept, and then it is really high level. And usually the first couple people that I pitch it to are Locke and Nerd of Prey, SJ and Jesse in the back. Jesse more for sanity check on the scope, right? Because it all comes down to, I give a lot of direction, but I don't actually have to build the stuff, right? So I'm usually looking ahead beyond what's being built right now and giving guidance on what's being built in terms of like a player-facing, kind of stuff. But they have to actually build it. Donovan and SJ work very closely together once that gets passed on. But it's really about that initial theme and that concept. And it is about what do we want the players to feel? What's the emotional tone and the note that comes through the comic books when you're dealing with these characters, and how can we best represent that through the type of gameplay and content that we build, which can be very challenging. Characters are things that I usually list out. Again, that's a big conversation I initially have with Locke. I want to have these characters. What do you think? Well, that's this many hours. I'll go over it with the art director, the character guys, and whatever, and we'll figure that out and kind of get a general okay that maybe the places and the spaces and the faces that I want to use for this are kind of within scope. And then I can talk to SJ and Donovan and the rest of the team about okay, here's what we're going to do, and get the what kind of look from it, and then kind of go back and forth, and we'll usually whiteboard stuff out in the next phase.
Feedback and planning. That's when we usually give feedback that, like, you're crazy, you can't have 43 new gods, so let's do 40.
I never said 43. I just want to say.
Okay. Good point.
Only 42.
39, sir. 39.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time in, like, Jens's office or Locke's office just on the whiteboards. We have so many whiteboards, and we love to fill them up with stuff. Like, even things like certain little robots that people will later crochet and give to us later. And also, yes, this is a big part of my job, and I work with the designers a lot doing it. We head to the library. We have a pretty good library. It's not bad. Anything I don't have, I just call DC and go, hey, give me that, and they send it, which is pretty awesome. And including some of the, like, Bibles and stuff that they have that they do, which we do not issue library cards. Sorry. And so we spend a lot of time researching the characters, and that really influences a lot of the design choices that that the guys come up with. Do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, guys on my team will come up with cool mechanics, and like say they want an iconic character to act a certain way or do some certain activity, and they always work really close with SJ. I always send them over right away to get an okay. Basically, if they're not familiar with the character or not familiar enough, definitely do the research. SJ will provide docs or books or just places to look at to get more information. She's real good about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that you're right. We do work really closely on that. Like, they're like, hey, so Mr. Miracle's running along with the gang, but there's a locked door. And I'm like, well, that's easy. Mr. Miracle, nothing's going to stop him from getting through a locked door. Just poof, get him on the other side, and he can unlock it for the team. You don't have to go look for a key. Kind of thing. It's just one example.
He is the key.
He's the key. We also talk about, like, story beats and vital lore, like things like you can't do blank without blank. You know, you can't do goblin without bat, you know, stuff like that. That's probably one of my things I say the most. I think can't do blank without blank. Story beats. I'm not sure if you guys know what story beats are, so I'll just explain what that is. It's like moments we've got to hit to get to where we need to go. We talk about that 3-act structure when there's, like, you know, there's setup and then confrontation and then climax. And, you know, I don't want to get, you know, too pushy on the gameplay. It'll be like, at some point in your instance, we need to find out this. We need to find out where the blank is, kind of thing. Or, you know, in Sons of Trigon, we need to reveal that all 3 of these sons are all vying for power, and how you want to work that into gameplay is up to you guys. And then they do it. I'll roll through that.
Yeah, so the next step is obviously us building the content. In my panel, I actually go into a little more in detail, and you guys have an exercise to go through this process. So this document that's right here, I handed one of those out where we plan out at a high level also what type of content we're going to build, what the theme is, how that fits into the story that we have direction on, and write out a basic flow that's just like what's in that document there. As a high-level map, we draw out the map, that's handed off to art. We work real close with art to make sure that what they can build is going to work for us functionally. And we go back and forth a lot on that. Sometimes we have to have maps that are used in multiple pieces of content, like the Mascara is used in 3 different missions. That has to be planned out really early, and it's a lot of fun. Things like ranks and BOGO, we actually plan to use in upcoming chapters of the DLCs, so that's really cool to plan that stuff out too. And then we have narrative design, obviously. We have to tell a story in these missions. So it's not always just about combat, content, and combat mechanics and things like that. We need to tell a story that's, you know, these guys are hammering into us right now. The cool story, the whole reason we're here in the DC universe is these cool stories. And we have to make sure that we're following that narrative through the entire mission. And like Ian said also, we may not enforce players to go through missions in a certain order, but we do have basically a story that we kind of point you through. If you follow each mission, you know, end to end, you will get the whole story for the DLC. Then we have collections. The collections, obviously, there's different types of collections. From a gameplay perspective, they're really cool not just in the idea of getting story and interesting narrative bits, which I'll let Esther talk about in a second, but just before that, I want to say that it also lends itself towards different gameplay styles. I mean, there's different people that like to play the game in different ways, like hunters and collectors. You know, people that want to go search around and find these things. Love posting pictures of them on the forum. You know, being the one that got the 3 rare drops out of the gold collection. Those types of achievers really enjoy those things too. So.
Really quick on the collection front, if I could. Like a great example of that, tying back to the creative level too, would be, you know, we with Halls of Power really broke that down initially into, look, here's how we're going to tell stories throughout the 3 of these. The first one is going to focus on the third world, the old gods, and we leaned on collections heavily, right, SJ, to kind of go back and say, well, because the dregs don't tell that story, and you don't want Mr. Miracle and Big Barda and Calabac or Mantis sitting there yapping about like the third world and the old gods and you know how their whole realm and age came to an end. So you do it in collections, and so the second one is going to be about the fourth world, which is the current cast of new gods. So there will be information in the collections about that. And if you can count, you know it's going to be part 3. Anyway.
And it's actually nice to include that kind of stuff in the collections because you can always go back and listen to it later.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really our only tool to tell background stories, other than having a guy stand around and just tell it. It works really well. So.
It's time to go get a sandwich.
Yeah.
And this is also the stage where we start doing dialogue writing, and a lot of the designers, they'll do the first pass, they'll write a lot of the, like, I want to do a cool scene, I want to do a thing where Hank Henshaw and Ranks talk to each other, and I'm like, that sounds awesome, dude.
You know what's funny about this part is we used to do temp VO. So we would have like people in the studio would come in and they would read the temp VO for the designers, and it would be just an actual person doing it, but it was taking up too much time. So now we do Robo VO, okay, where we actually have just a program that takes the dialogue that's been typed in and it reads it in a very Stephen Hawking-like fashion, and it gets things wrong all the time. So early play tests are rather humorous. We're looking forward to the Robo VO. You know, it actually pronounces the ... if you have the little ellipses.
GRR ...
Yeah. Oh, if there's a piece of chatter that's like grrr, and then it's like GRRR. UGH for ugh. Good stuff.
So when we write dialogue, I was talking about the scripted scenes that are really cool. I really like those iconic moments where they talk back and forth, and so our little scripts will look like that, very cinematic, but most of the time they look like this. Hundreds, in some DLCs, thousands of lines of VO. We have to write VO for all of the moments, all the cut scenes, and then of course all the chatter. I mean, you don't hear they say every time, so we come up with clever lines. That also helps tell the story. Like, you are a gnat. Oh, he's not a very nice dude, is he? I don't think so. And I mean, at launch, I think we were into the tens of thousands of lines of VO. It's pretty outrageous. In fact, we actually have, at the time, we got the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest cast of any video game.
Well, comes at a price.
Yes, indeed.
Literally, yeah.
And the final stage is polish. That's where we do additional dialogue writing and editing. I go through and I'll edit a lot of the stuff for voice and character. If some designers, that's not their favorite thing to do, so they point me in a direction of what they're trying to get, and then I try to polish it up and make it really hit the brand and sound like something you get out of the comic books. It's also where we do the cinematics, because it's really hard to make these really dramatic, awesomely timed cut scenes with GRR in them, so we wait till we have the final VO, and then we can make it actually fit and sound really awesome. The final VO recording. A much improvement when we have those final play tests and they're not shouting at us in robotext. And the audio team does a lot of sweetening. I mean, for example, like Ranks, he's just this guy that we hired to do the voice of Ranks. He just sounds like a man. But when we get into the audio design studio, the sound guys, they'll add processes, which is like when they make it sound more robotic, and then he turns into this really epic sounding robot, mean little jerk. And so now we want to go through and tell you how we do it. What kind of devices do we use in the game to tell the story throughout all these stages? We got the cinematics are a huge part of it. It also helps us message things like who's important. The casting process and VO recording, something that a lot of people don't think about, environmental storytelling. That's actually one of the topics I'm most excited to talk about. The collections, which is also a favorite of mine because I've been reading DC Comics for way too long, since birth, I think, and that gives us an opportunity to touch on all those iconic characters and moments.
Should be a Guinness Book of World Records for that.
Yeah! And then iconic instances, which are a unique storytelling device that we get to use on occasion. So let's talk about cinematics a little bit. Why do we decide to use them, and what, and how do we do it? So usually it's an opportunity for us to control the action. Like, we need to get everybody in the room, we need them to pay attention, because it's just going to explain what's happening. It's also going to build up the moment, or it's going to, give resolution. It also directs player attention to important things like, look over there, that doorknob is locked. We don't do that a lot, but sometimes there are, I think of the example of in the alternate reality Gotham, when Catwoman joins the fight with evil Batman. When we did the first few play tests, people were like, I have no idea who's hitting me. Holy crap, how did Catwoman get here? And they just didn't know where she came from. So we added a really short cutscene to be like, oh, there she is coming through the window. It looked really cool, and it also had people go, oh, okay, now we need to change our tactics. It also lets us do emotional stuff, like something that if you're checking your inventory, you're totally gonna miss it, and we're like, no, this is totally critical, and we have to see it, and we want it to be really cinematic. And I think it's both badass and hilarious when he bitch slaps him over the wall. It's one of my favorite things in the game. And then just getting really cool looking shots, something that you would want to cut out of a comic book or movie and put it on your wall. And one way we get to the final cutscene is through storyboarding. We'll do it on a whiteboard sometimes. Sometimes I'll try to pretend I can draw and do my best little Hank Henshaw. I even drew a cyborg on it. And I'll sit down with the design team and we'll talk about it and go through our little script that we wrote and break down each camera shot and allow us to go, and this is the part where he says that. Because when you sit down and you think, I want to do a cool cutscene, it doesn't just happen. You have to make decisions, like when will he say that line, and where will the players be? Will they be in the shot? Can we include them in it? It's a little trickier. It's more work to do it that way. But sometimes it's just really cool to have Batman walk and talk with you, and your guys walking along with them. And I've seen really cool videos where certain people dress up in funny costumes and put it on YouTube while they're in the camera. But to get those really cool moments, we also need to cast the right people. At the beginning, whenever we're casting a new iconic, or particularly iconics, audio, and Jens and I will come up with a character sheet. Basically, Alex Keller, our VO director, will break down the character, run it through me and Jens to make sure if there's anything we want to add, like any particular line we want to have them read for their audition. And then we literally get dozens of auditions for each character. Sometimes they're amazing, sometimes they're less than amazing, but I was super happy with Big Barda and Mr. Miracle. I thought they sounded great together. I thought they had really good chemistry, and we found out in the recording session the second day with Mr. Miracle, we're like, yeah, well, we want you to sound like you're really in a relationship with her. And he's like, that's cool, she's my girlfriend. Oh, okay, well then, I don't think I need to give you much more direction than that. And in the recording sessions, that's actually one of my favorite things about this job. We have so many great actors. I can't help but clap for Kevin too. So. Getting to work with Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy and just so many amazing voice actors. And then a lot of people local to the Austin scene. We just uncovered a whole bunch of new actors that we're excited to get in. One guy came in and read for Mr. Miracle, and I was like, holy crap, he's Orion, don't cast him for Mr. Miracle. And he's like, damn it, I wanted a job, but soon, I swear. And then it's really fun. You would
say that to everybody.
It's soon. It's like, and then I put a little E to M. And it's really fun for me because while Alex, our VO director, he really talks about like timbre and pitch and you should go down and up, and I'm like, okay, so you're really mad because that guy does not like your mom or whatever. I get in there and I explain where it's coming from, because when we give them the script, they're not in the order of how the content plays. It's more in like stuff that's easier on their voice, like I'm whispering now, we put at the front, and at the end we put all the screams because we don't want them to blow their voice out. So they're really jumping around. And I like to get in there and explain, you know, like one time Mark Hamill was like, so I'm making an ape joke here. Am I talking to Gorilla Grodd? I'm like, oh no, you're actually talking to Ultra Human. And he's like, well, that's not really going to affect my performance. And I'm like, okay, moving on. And sometimes we have those scripted scenes, and one of us will play the other part because it helps get that timing down. You know, unfortunately, it's not like an actual film where we can get all the actors in the room at the same time and just have the back and forth. So we step in and do it. And Legends VO, every time we bring in an iconic, we try to grab that because it's so important to me when you get a new Legends character that they get to have those iconic things they say, like that stuff you heard over and over again during the PvP tournament. We also try to make it unique or a little funny. Like, I don't know if you guys enjoy this cutscene or cinematic as much as we do, but Wonder Girl really hates liars. So now we're going to talk about environmental storytelling, and environmental storytelling, which is something that people often overlook outside the art department. And it's literally like you go into this area and how do you feel immediately? Like when you walked into the necropolis, what did it feel like? It didn't feel like you were like on a sunny beach somewhere. You weren't like, let's all go to the beach. It felt creepy and dark, and like the first time I stepped into Gotham, I felt like, man, I've got to get to work. This place is dump, you know. And the Wrath Cathedral is one of my favorites because the environment artist really wanted to just tear the place up, and I'm like, do it, because that looks amazing. And it really felt like, you know, like Jared had stepped into his space in the corrupted, you know, Gotham wastelands, and his wrath literally ripped the windows apart as soon as he got there.
It takes a lot to get this part done too. This shouldn't be this is a really significant portion of the process. Like when we were trying to do Mogo and get the power ring right in the main chamber, right, you know, and have it on that big pillar, it took a ton of iteration of getting the size of it right, getting the actual, you know, height of it right, just to get that one moment that we knew we wanted in there, which was like, yeah, he needs this power ring, it's got to be on this rock like it's his finger, you know. And sometimes the thing that's in your head isn't necessarily jumping out off, you know, into the artist's head, and it takes them a long time to kind of grok that. Sometimes you get it right away, sometimes not. So it really is a very important part of the process, because you want that emotional impact right when you come into the room that tells you, oh, this isn't just a cave, we're inside a being, this is a member of the core, right? So it's really super important part.
Yeah, I thought Mogo was a really good example of that, because of like, we're like, so we've got the players and all these, you know, NPCs gathering mist everywhere. I'm like, well, where are they taking it? Well, let's put it in Mogo. That's a really good place. So when you get there, you actually see that it's the piles lying around, and then of course the scripted activity where the NPCs are carrying them around, showing you, you know, that you're actually accomplishing something when you pick it up in the open world.
Yeah, I want to say something along that same lines. Is that one of the things that I always talk to my designers about when they're building content is to first think about what the setting is, what's happening in the location. I think we did that in our little project yesterday. That when we were talking about the place that you guys are thinking for your setting, what is going on there, what's happening before the players even walk into the area. People are living there or doing something or carrying mist barrels around. They're doing work, so you're walking in and interrupting it. So what they're doing has to support the environment and the story.
And we always try and do something that relates back to what the players' activities are doing too, right? So you're doing mist gathering down in Metropolis, and then where do those things go that teleport up? You see it in Mogo. It reinforces it. Everything reinforces itself.
One example I always think of is from the launch game. I mean, it's pretty clear here that somebody came through as probably either Mr. Freeze or Captain Cold. And you don't need like Oracle to pop on and go, well, it looks like Mr. Freeze was here. No, you already know that just by the icicles hanging off and stuff. And you were talking about connecting the two areas. Do you want to go into any more detail about that?
Sure. If you want. Go for it. If I missed something.
Let's. No, like he mentioned that whole like collecting stuff in the open world and taking it up to Mogo, and you said something about I want to see it up there, I want to see it in the sky because we're gonna go there, you know, and that's something I really like in video games. When you're like, oh, I see that, and then you go there later and you're like, oh man, that means I'm like 100 bajillion miles above the Earth right now, and it really helps you feel like you're actually going to a new place.
Yeah, the red lanterns and yellow lanterns are assaulting Mogo constantly. You can see that here too.
The alternate timelines, that was a very unique opportunity for us to use environmental storytelling because we wanted it to be Metropolis or Gotham, but they have a different story there. They have a different backstory, they have different characters, the world they live in is not the same. And so one way we attacked that was different signage and different times of day, like just a little bit, so it felt a little different when you got there. You're like, it kind of feels like Metropolis, but something's different. And then you start looking at the signs and you see stuff like happy-go-lucky sunshine Lex Luthor down there, and you're like, well, that ain't right. And then you see Bruce up there and the very dark, you know, fascist colors and a very impressive poster there, which actually looks much like his Wayne Corp poster looks a lot like the LexCorp one.
Bruce was a total dick in that time.
Yeah.
He also takes a helicopter straight across the street.
Yeah.
I know. It's like, I don't walk anywhere.
Non-environmentally friendly.
Okay, so one thing we're going to talk about now is collections. And because in those environments, you'll find these guys, your favorite little blues, greens, and golds. And so briefs, let's talk about those first. They allow us to really go deep into the comics and start digging up, you know, stuff that'll help you understand the characters better, or really cool moments, or like we thought, you know, a lot of people may not really know that much about Hippolyta and why, you know, how is she Wonder Woman's mom? They're all immortal, you know, and so we added that briefing where she goes and seeks guidance from the High Priestess to explain that she just feels like she's missing something in her life. And if you're playing the game and you read a lot of the comics and you hear that and you're like, I know what that is, I know exactly what they're talking about, you feel like you're part of it. And if you don't know what it is, you're going to learn something about the comics. It might even get you interested to go read more about it. I don't, no, we don't have any audio. So. I can act it, this is Batman, no. So investigations, the green ones, they're a little bit closer to the content, and if you've noticed, they actually support the context of what's going on. If there's like a bunch of scientists and hazmat guys around, you might get research notes that'll explain, you know, it had eyes, it looked at me, this thing's really gross, you know, and so you understand what's happening at Ace Chemicals a little better.
Just to be a little humorous sometimes too.
That's true. Speaking of humor, we like to do that a lot with the golds. My favorite, I believe, are from Home Turf. There's some amusing golds in that one. And the seasonal stuff.
There's going to be a spoon collection in the next one, confirmed.
And Meps's candy bar.
Oh wow, you totally can't read that. So yeah, I have more lens than I used to. Is that okay? The Women of Themyscira magazine is often sought out in Strikers Island. Oh, and so that unique thing, we don't do a lot, but it did let us tell a really cool backstory for the Amazon Fury War and how it started. And we've actually gotten a lot of feedback that was pretty much, you know, if they really dug it, that was a big reason why. Because rather than just having, again, a comm pop up and go, so like Circe went to talk to Hippolyta and shit went down, I mean stuff went down, and now they're like working together, you know, we just let you actually experience it, and it let us go through, and actually, you get to, since you're playing the iconic, a lot of the cinematics and stuff get to be more comic book-like and have an exchange between the two iconic characters. And it plays almost like a single-player game. So we get to do some mechanics like that too, but we also get to do a really tight narrative where your own character can talk, which is completely out of scope, so don't bother asking about that later. And it let us tell the story really fully. That's some feedback I've been given on the forums about how they really liked how they actually knew what was going on in this war. And that's all good and fun, but we know that this game is really about your story, your character's progression and interaction with the iconics, and how they're really the central figures. That's why we put Fracture in the video, in the word trailer for part 2, because it's absolutely important that this character that you created is the one doing this stuff. You know, Batman and company could not do it without us. You. Sorry, I play, so I think of it from that perspective too. And so what's really cool about that is unlike in books, comics, movies, and stuff like that, the actors and writers they're writing towards 2 characters you're watching, but in games you get to be a part of that scene, and the actors are performing knowing they're talking to you. We're writing and designing things knowing that it's all going to you, and not just like Batman and Joker fighting each other. It's more like they're turning it towards the person on the keyboard or on the controller on the other side and interacting with them.
Can I just chime in on this last 2 slides
Sure.
really fast? So like the narrative is yours, you don't have to go back, okay? And the iconic anomaly one, it's kind of interesting how those actually change the story for us too. Like there was a moment in War of the Light Part 2 where we actually had to decide that we were going to do something fundamentally different at the beginning with the iconic characters, because originally we had intended that small group DLC to actually have 2 iconic anomalies in it, where you were playing Sinestro and playing Hal Jordan to go do a very specific thing on their home planets as at the power batteries. And given that there's some people that like iconic anomalies and some people that don't, as SJ explained why we like them from our point of view, players do want to play their own character in these stories. So we actually had to make a shift in terms of, this was a big discussion amongst the designers and us when we were doing this, you know, how do we make this work where we can have villains and heroes play both sides? So we started the alliance of the leaders of the cores a little earlier than we intended. Initially it was going to be in part 3, and we moved it up a little bit, because these kind of things, to get you more involved, will actually shape what we want to do with the narrative in the parts.
So the source material we have to work with there's so much, and you know, at the end of the day we have to decide which stories we want to tell, and you know, and we very rarely is every single person excited about the same character. So it's always gonna, you know, this week or this year it may not be your favorite guy, but it might be that guy's favorite guy. So it's a difficult choice for us to make. Whoops, that would be the wrong arrow.
Look at Spectre just messing up the anti-monitor right there. The sun go down.
Photobomb.
I think he's just trying to do the bunny ears.
I don't really know how to do this. And so one of the biggest questions we get most frequently is, when does this all happen? Because it's kind of like the Sinestro Corps War, but it's really more like 52. But so it's really not about when; it's more about where. We try to really take the most iconic moments and put our spin on it, and it's kind of like a greatest hits. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, this is something that Jim and I talked about way early on when we were coming up with the story for this, because one of the most important things at the birth of this game, eight and a half years ago when we started talking about it, was getting players involved in the whole thing and a central aspect to the story. But at the same time, we knew, well, that gets it out of continuity in general, right? And so what were we going to do? You know, Batman was actually dead in the comics at the time, or supposedly dead, and Dick Grayson was. Well, you can't come into this game and see Dick Grayson as Batman. That's not going to make any sense. And you know, but we liked, you know, Tim Drake as Robin at the time, and because we wanted Nightwing in there. And so, you know, what was the right decision when you're entering into this universe? And we decided that it didn't matter. We were going to take the cross section of what we thought was sort of the heart of the character, their heyday, so to speak, where what most people kind of know about them from all the different kinds of media that they are exposed in, and take those ideal moments and put them all together.
I also recommend everybody, if you haven't read them, pick up the trade paperbacks for the DC Universe Online Comics.
Oh,
And
okay.
it explains sort of the pocket universe that we're in.
Yes.
And why it's a paradox in and of itself. So.
Yes.
Aquaman?
And you kind of segued into my next point. Thank you. So future Lex Luthor and future Batman have really, in Origin Crisis, they've really jacked up the time stream so much it pretty much allows us to do any story we want. So I sent them a thank you note. So let's wrap it up. So, ultimately I go into work, and we all go into work, and we want to tell compelling stories. Stories that we all, dreamt about when we were kids. I'm going to go with Batman, and we're going to go help out. Or I'm going to go with Superman, and we're going to fly across Metropolis. I'm going to do something with those characters that I've been, dreaming about since I was a child. And I can't, take credit for that all on my own. And this guy can't, and this guy can't. It takes everybody on the team, every single person on the team. Even down to the people testing it, we get feedback from them like, I don't know what the hell's going on. Oh crap, sorry, we should probably add some more information about why you're there and what you're doing. And we have, like we talked about, we have tons of ways to tell the story, and it's essentially just a tool belt, and we just, we need a good collection right here to explain who the old gods are. And we're lucky to have such a massive universe to take inspiration from. So here we go. Time to open it up for questions and answers. Well, at least questions. I will pick Joker.
This question has been asked before.
Well, what are you doing
We
there?
didn't really get an answer.
Moving on.
We didn't really get an answer though. Introducing the cinematics was one of the really cool things, like the camera control and having us walk along with their characters. Coincidentally, the DLC that was released, the one before that, the last lap, was the last DLC where we actually got to see those motion comics that we would see. We were leveling up and we would beat an instance. And that was one of the really cool things about it. And has there been a reason for the shift in not doing that anymore, or are we going to see those coming back?
Okay, so the history of cutscenes in this game is a sordid one. So we had initially, we weren't really going to do them much at all. We were going to have these things called cool cams, and they were going to be just sort of like, wow, the impact shots when a boss spawned, and they weren't going to do much with that. Well, that wasn't enough for me when I was doing like some of the original boss fights. Like at the first fight I think I did as a benchmark for boss fights was the Harley fight, and how to get the characters involved in the fights. And it has just a pretty simple cool cam. But as we went on, we wanted to tell better stories and actually get narrative in there. So we took this system that wasn't meant for scripted storytelling in cameras. And oh my God, was it crazy to try and implement these things and the hoops you had to jump through with encounters and AI to get these kinds of, it was terrible. And we didn't have Matinee at the time because it was going to have too big of a performance hit on the servers to do Matinees. I don't know why that changed later. I need a maybe Lars can speak to that later. So once we got the actual matinees, that was a huge boon for us because we could do these things much more easily. Right, Jesse? Easily. Yeah. Yes, I am. I'm getting into this whole thing. Okay. So the reason the comic cutscenes went away was because, A, they're really hard to do because the amount of time that they took to actually do and our DLC cycle time, I would actually have to have the entire cutscene written for the DLC before I had to pitch the DLC to the team. Okay, so I had to commit to every little beat, moment, and thing in the narrative and all the imagery you were going to see long before we even had hammered it all out, and things change over time. Okay, so we wanted to avoid that. At launch, they were all done after the content was done. But as we got into live, they had to be done before the content was done. And it became really hard. And they're very time-consuming to make. Okay. Once the matinee came online, because we were really frustrated with our in-game cameras, we were actually able to put you in the cutscenes and actually tell the story in a more immersive way for you. They became redundant in my mind as far as the creative, aspect went. Yeah, they're freaking cool. They're totally amazing. And Eric Duncan is taking over the responsibility of making the key art move so we can all have that little taste of the old cutscenes now. I was very impressed with the Halls of Power key art. That was awesome. Did you notice it moved? It had some shifts in there? Okay, see? There you go. That's where they are now. No, but that's why. They were the timing didn't work anymore. The bang, the impact for how hard they were to produce, and what they then would limit us because we couldn't stray too far from that because it was an expenditure too. You know, we didn't just throw that down the toilet. What?
Not cheap either.
Yeah, I was going to stay away from that, but I'll say it now that Eric did. They were ghastly expensive, like crazy expensive to make. You'd be shocked.
They also take up a lot of space.
And when you download the game, you'd be also shocked at how much of the footprint in memory is actually for VO in the game and these cutscenes. It's the majority. It's crazy how big they are. So every time we added one, it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and localizing them before we actually had subtitles in the game. You know, we had to localize them all. So it just didn't make sense anymore. We had a better tool to do it with. So they will not be returning.
Yeah, we definitely got constrained in like the last lap of when that comic came out. There were design decisions that we couldn't change because that was already made. We had to stick to what was already made.
And it's responsible for some of the content being the way it is, quite frankly. And that should not be that way. That's not how you want to be making an interactive experience, being led by a 40-second cutscene. You know, it's just not right.
Next. This.
Do you find it more difficult to write stories when there's unique content for villains and heroes? Or do you find it more difficult to come up with excuses for why heroes and villains would be doing the same stuff?
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, SJ is very talented at writing things in the game, and she can take both sides of the story and come up with great ideas on how they both work. But then he and his team have to actually double the amount of encounters and that they have to create, which doubles the amount of testing and potential bugs that go on. So that actually starts coming down to a production concern.
What's easy for me isn't easy for them necessarily.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can usually, go into the pants of the character and decide why they're...
What? Did you just say? Yes, shoes. Say the shoes. Let's keep out of their pants. Okay. Please continue. I know you're not frazzled.
That was kind of awesome.
So we can find motivation. I mean, there's always motivation. The Joker wants to do something that's the opposite of what Batman's doing. We can see their motivation and fit that into the gameplay. It's pretty easy.
So the team that I worked with designing content yesterday, better hear some good motives for why villains are doing anything. But does that answer your question, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually one of the reasons too that anomalies, like we say, were appealing to us because it didn't matter your faction. You could step into the shoes through this iconic vision, right? To experience this vicariously through a character, and then we could actually tell both sides of the story to both factions. You could experience it all, but we didn't have to do double the work.
Hands. Flash.
Which one? There's one in the back.
Star Wars: The Old Republic has an option to where
Oh boy, here we go.
all of the group members can vote to skip the cutscene if they already have seen it. Is that possible for DCUO? Is that something you always want us to see every single time?
Donovan!
Well, the problem with that right now is the game's been made in a certain way for a really long time now, and we do a lot of stuff in the background. We may spawn up guys, despawn guys, open doors, close doors. All those things are happening in the background. And if we were to add a skipping of cams now, going back and trying to add that to any cams that already exist in the game would be a nightmare for us to find out where the state of everything is in a piece of content. When how do you know if those things have happened when the door closes? It's really difficult now just because of the way the game has been planned out from the beginning. There are tech issues too. We'd have to have that ability. There just isn't that ability in the engine right now.
I want to see if I can...
The compromise has been to actually try and be as focused and directed in the cutscenes as possible so that we're not dragging you out for too long. Because when we first got Matinee, we went crazy. We were like, we're going to do all this stuff! And then everybody was like, okay, I get it, Space Commander Luther. Let's just get on with this.
Yeah, we make the cams really short now. And usually like the SJ and the designers will want to put like 8 cams in the DLC or something, and I'll say, no, we need to put 4 cams in the DLC. There's other ways we can tell the story that doesn't force you to look at get stuck in a cam. There are absolutely points where it makes sense, but we try our best not to force players into that.
Next question. Farkas.
So this kind of goes back to what Tesseract mentioned. Most people here know I play villain side basically exclusively, and I can even look in this room and see many people who used to play villain side who are now playing on the hero side. And besides population issues, I think one of the reasons it's been brought up to me by a lot of people I play with, it doesn't feel like there's a compelling villain story in any of these DLCs. It doesn't feel like there's a reason for the villains other than the fact that the heroes are doing something and we're villains, so we got to counter them or stop them. Sometimes it just doesn't feel like there's a reason to be a villain, particularly when we're helping up, say, the Batcave, we're helping the Fortress of Solitude. It seems almost like there's no actual villains, just heroes and anti-heroes.
Yeah, that's a tough one, man. I mean, it's in many cases, well, I shouldn't say many, but in some cases you're absolutely right. The Batcave one is a perfect example. But it's really challenging. I'm not trying to be, have a cop-out for it, but it's really hard because, first of all, we're not going to leave Gotham in a state of, yeah, the villains won. Like, that's just not going to work. It's not going to work for you guys. It's not going to work for DC as far as the IP goes. Just the fact of the matter is that the heroes usually always save the world in the end, and the world needs to be in a state where it is relatively in a stable, well, it's kind of funny to say that after 3 years of looking at Gotham and Metropolis, that the world is a stable place. But you know what I mean, right? It's just
I do, and
it's just it's a square peg in a round hole because typically the protagonists antagonists are there to just be a roadblock for the protagonist. And when you think about the villain as the protagonist, it becomes a much harder thing to kind of crack when you still have the opposite side of the coin going through the process as well. Superman's a mentor in the world too. And the fact of the matter is that Lex loses all the time. Like, otherwise the world would be a different place. So it's tough. And I don't know. I don't know much more to say about that. Right now we try and do the big bad. It's no good for anybody if this guy wins. But if we were going to try and do specific villain storylines too, then we're making 2 DLCs really, and that's just not within our scope. I'm not trying to say that we're abandoning villains in any way. We certainly spend a lot of time trying to incorporate them as best we possibly can, and I think we've done a better job of that in recent DLCs. And I assure you, it's a topic of conversation that we go through every time we talk about a DLC.
And I'm not saying try and make completely separate content, but I'm almost wondering if it might be worth long-term goal in the future, thinking about almost doing away with villain versus hero, and something where they can play alongside each other because they aren't at heads.
Well, one thing that I think about when I'm working on breaking down these stories that we're working on right now is, for example, I actually think that Sons of Trigon and Amazon Fury is much more of a Circe story than it is Wonder Woman. You say the heroes are doing something and the villains are doing stuff. No, in that one, to me, Circe's really, really doing the stuff, and Wonder Woman is having to react to it. Like the whole Victory Stone thing, and then the weird thing, why are you with my mom now? Stuff like that. So I actually feel like Circe's almost more of the protagonist there. Now
she's done it, yeah.
But anyway, so we try to do it where we can. I think I'm out of time.
One more question.
One more
question.
You get to pick.
I get to pick?
Yeah.
For his spectacular Legends play, I'm going to go with John Knoll.
My question is, the summer event with Aquaman and Ocean Master? I know you're a big Aquaman fan. Is there any plans to do a DLC maybe with Aquaman?
I just announced in the keynote, that one of the next themes for the DLCs was going to be Kryptonian based, not Doomsday based, Kryptonian based, which would include Doomsday. But I asked SJ about 3 months ago, something like that. Told her that I was thinking about some ideas for trilogies, and I wanted her to come up with some of her own as well and pitch them to me. We both had Atlantis on our list. I shy away from it a little because since I voiced the character, I feel like everybody will be like, "Yeah, dude, you just wanted to do the voice." So, but since it was on her list, maybe that makes for enough of an impartial opinion that we could do it. But we haven't committed to any of the other 2 DLCs yet because there are a lot of great characters that we would like to explore right now. We have certain ones on the table: Flash, Black Adam, Shazam. bunch of Gotham stuff that we have up there. She came up with a great one for more of a time travel Vandal Savage, you know. And then there's countless ideas that you guys have come up with and provided with on the forums. So it's not like I'm leaking anything here. It's just like, yeah, there's all these characters. We're probably all thinking about the same kind of DLCs, you know, and Atlantis one and Aquaman one's kind of a no-brainer.
Servo and Tomba fighting each other.
Oh, I love it. Pretty good.
You can have a Booster Gold one.
Oh, that's a terrible idea. I think I would do a bumbling, a Blue Beetle one before I did that. But it would be with Jamie, just so.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks so much.